Welcome to Directly Correct, a Painless podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, David Solot, IOPsych at the American Board of Internal Medicine.
Thanks to our sponsors, One Model. One Model helps people leaders at large organizations make consistently brilliant talent decisions by unlocking the analytical value of the data dispersed across your business. One Model's people analytics platform takes all of the heavy lifting out of data extraction, cleansing, modeling, analytics, and reporting of enterprise workforce data. One Model pioneered people data orchestration and has perfected the ethical use of AI and data science for leaders who need transparent and explainable decision support systems. HR and business teams trust its accurate reports, analyses, and storytelling capabilities. Data scientists, engineers, and people analytics professionals love the combination of governance and flexibility that no other workforce insights platform can provide. To learn more, book a demo at onemodel.co/directionallycorrect. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
I'll tell you how we were trying to figure out if Cole has met you, David. I think that it may have been possible. So I randomly, about a year and a half ago, Googled Star Trek IO podcast. And it just so happened that David had published like a week or two prior to that. And I was like, oh my God, my luck. I listened to him. I thought they were fantastic. And he set up a Star Trek meetup at PSYOP Boston. And I think that you stopped by, Cole, and you must have met David there, if you in fact did stop by.
I don't think I stopped by. I don't recall. I remember we talked about the meetup with Islam and, gosh, why is his name escaping me? Our other guests. Remember that episode we had?
He was there. Yeah, those two were there.
I do not recall going to this meetup. At that PSYOP, I do remember going. I accidentally went into the Comic-Con thing once or twice, but I didn't. I don't think I went to the Star Trek meetup. Or let me put it to you this way: that sounds like my nightmare, and so if I went there, it wasn't on purpose.
This may be Cole's like nightmare episode. He's not a big Star Trek fan. I finally get to nerd out in a nerdy way.
I tell you, it was nerve-wracking setting up that meet. I saw everybody was doing these pre-conference meetups, and I was like, well, how would people feel about, a really geeky look at Star Trek and IO psychology? And I was so thrilled that so many people came by and stopped by, and we found so many people that like Star Trek and that like looking at it from our perspective. And it was a lot of fun. I just have to commit now to making more of those podcasts because they were so labor intensive to do those first two. I love doing it, but I need to kind of refocus and make some more of them.
Yeah. Well, Scott, did you go to that meetup and how did it go?
I definitely went to the meetup. There was, I don't know, maybe 10 folks there. It was really, really good. It was kind of all over the place the way you would expect it to be. But I think that the Star Trek universe, I'm a massive Trekkie. It's a great way to think about IO because you get like this like little like capsule. There's the same way like sports is a good way to look at IO. You get this like little capsule of the universe and kind of see how different things play out. There's training, there's selection, there's culture, there's all sorts of elements there.
Well, yeah, and it's not that I'm necessarily fearful or dislike Star Trek. I'm just ignorant to it. And so Scott did me a solid before this episode. He sent me a list of all the top Star Trek characters and descriptions of them, I guess out of ChatGPT or something like that. So at least I can fake it for this episode.
OCBs, baby. You got to keep your co-host happy.
Organizational citizenship behaviors for the uninitiated, but excellent. But I don't know, Scott, what do you want to talk about in regards to Star Trek?
Well, let's just like dig into it. Like Dave and I had a really good conversation the other day, and we had a good conversation at PSYOP. What comes to mind when you think about like IO and Star Trek? Your podcast did a fantastic job of like digging in through like leadership behaviors, this sort of stuff. I don't want to step on you, but yeah, what sort of elements come to your mind?
Well, it's a lot of it has to do with the way organizations work together. And what got me started thinking about it was, I don't know if you introduced Cole to the first episode, which was about the trouble with Edward, which was a follow-up to the whole trouble with Tribbles thing that Strange New World was going to do. And it basically was a problem employee. Edward was someone who was a little quirky, a little different and had a big chip on his shoulder, and a new captain who had absolutely no idea how to manage someone who wasn't a top performer and who didn't just fit into the rest of the culture. And it winds up, he's winds up yelling at the captain, "I'm not dumb." He winds up setting her up by submitting an anonymous complaint to Starfleet Command that she's rude and that she's doesn't know what she's doing, and just messes everything up, and winds up with, the ship blows up and the captain's on trial, and all she can say is he was an idiot. Is the last line. The last line is he was an idiot.
A single employee can ruin your ship. You can't sink your battleship.
Well, but that's what got me started thinking about it is, there's so much interpersonal relationship on Star Trek that has to do with how we work in our jobs. And some of it's realistic, some of it's not realistic. And I thought it'd be great to start digging into it and talk about that and things like AI. And there's just a lot that you can cover.
What is the name of your podcast? So for those who are listening.
Yeah, it's called Division 10, The Psychology of Star Trek. The Starfleet has all of these different divisions, supposedly, that focus on different things. So I invented Division 10, which is where all the IO psychologists work. So if we were there, our jobs would be to travel around to the different ships, to different star bases, and, assess and make sure that, everything is functioning well, and improve teams and make sure we're recruiting people for the right jobs and so forth.
I think this is one of the great things about Star Trek, and then the variety. It's kind of a cliche, like all the spinoffs of Star Trek. You got, Strange New Worlds and Next Generation, all this sort of stuff. But you get so many varieties of characters and so many different situations that you can almost like put yourself in that position. Say you have a problematic employee. How do you deal with that person? What would you do in that situation? What did they do? What worked? What didn't work? Obviously, it's a fictional universe, but you do get like there's like a situational judgment sort of situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think and I think they do a lot of it without necessarily intending to. I know that Star Trek has always been very socially conscious, so they deal with a lot of, big social issues of the time. But I don't know if they intentionally go after things in our realm, in the IO psychology realm, but it comes up. It comes up a lot. Like, they replace one captain with another captain for an episode, and the whole episode is about how the crew can't stand the new captain. And you take a step back and look at it from an IO perspective, and you're like, yeah, he's autocratic. He's autocratic. He doesn't listen. He doesn't do consensus-based decision making, and they're all used to that. And, but why is he effective? Because it works sometimes. I don't think they're planning this out, but there's just a lot of it that you can use as examples. I'd love to teach a class one day and just have the whole class be, examples from Star Trek, different episode, different analysis every class.
So this is either going to be the best question or worst question I've ever asked. Tell us from an IOPsych leadership perspective, who is a better leader between Captain Kirk, Spock, Captain Picard, and Commander Riker? Is this a bad question? I'm sorry. I'm really trying to do my best.
This is the ChatGPT special.
Yeah, this is a ChatGPT special.
Well, I mean, we could talk about the role of technology as well in Star Trek.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the IO psychology easy way out and say it depends on the times in which you needed a leader. Captain Kirk was right for leadership in the 1960s. He was the John Wayne, swashbuckling, everyone could respect him. He was powerful, strong, clearly in charge, made quick decisions. But as we get into, you guys know, as we get into like the 90s and we get into the 2000s, people want more empathy. They wanted more consensus-based leadership. And we saw Captain Picard, who was more focused on, sitting around. He had his ready room where he'd sit with his crew and they'd talk about the problem first. He wouldn't just say, here's what we're going to go do. He'd say, let's, everyone in my ready room, and they'd talk about it first. So I think you see a transition in Star Trek that the leadership reflects the times. Even going up to now with Captain Pike in Strange New Worlds, he is very empathic as a leader. He invites his crew to dinner once a week. He makes sure that nobody's feeling too stressed out, that everyone's meeting their own personal goals as a Starfleet officer. I mean, it really reflects where our world of work has gone over the last, 60 or some odd years. So I didn't say who I thought is the best. I would say out of the group you gave me, I would say Captain Picard. If I had to pick one, I'd say it was the best, most effective.
He's definitely the most well-rounded, diplomatic sort of leader out there. Absolutely. But like you mentioned, the technology. I'm really fascinated by this and your current role at the American Board of Internal Medicine. Like we've come so far with, like, say, Gen AI and this sort of stuff, and you can see the kind of lineage of technology throughout Star Trek. What sort of things stand out from, like, an IO perspective as sort of like technological advances that we can either utilize now or maybe coming around the corner?
They did a great job in the original series, which I'd recommend everybody watch this one episode because it is so relevant to our times. The episode is called The Ultimate Computer. And it was a scientist had created essentially what we today would look at as an AI that could do the job of a starship captain. And the entire episode was they install it on the Enterprise. Kirk has to just sit back and go through all these trainings as the AI runs his ship and makes decisions about what planet to go to, who to send down on the landing party. And of course, it ends in a predictably catastrophic fashion, where they do mock war games and the AI thinks it's really being attacked and it decides to use lethal force against other starships. But it's amazing if you go back and watch it now, given the technology they had at the time, they are dealing with the same types of concerns that we have now about what's AI going to do? Is it going to take my job? Is it going to make me less of a person? Kirk has this long speech about, in 1960s terms, how a man needs to feel like a man, but in our terms, I have to feel like I achieved something. And is it what happens when it gets out of control? If you can't turn it off, it decides to go too far. That jumps out at me as that's like unbelievably relevant and so prescient for a show that was made in the 1960s to have predicted the kind of discussions we'd be having about AI today.
There's a new episode of Lower Decks that's very similar, where they just have like an automated ship. They don't even need crew anymore. But I think that's so right. We find so much meaning and purpose in our work. What happens if that all goes away? What if that's all automated out because it can do it better, or make do it faster, or what have you?
I was listening to a podcast yesterday about evolving artificial intelligence and the concern that there are these different levels of safety that we have for artificial intelligence today, from how dangerous could it be if things went wrong. And the upshot is that AI is now starting to enter level 3 and 4 on a 5-point scale, where it could potentially be catastrophic to society. Because what do you do if you're not needed? Not just a feeling of accomplishment. What do you do if, as knowledge workers, we've got AIs that are smarter than the smartest? We invent one that's smarter than the smartest Nobel laureate. What do we do after that?
Sit around like those fat people in Wall-E in our little chairs, cruising around the cruise ship.
And why do so many like billionaires and tech luminaries think it's going to kill us all? Like, does that fit into the 5-point scale? And is that related to this at all? Sorry, I'm trying to make myself relevant.
No, it is. When you get to like level 4 and level 5, which are threats we don't really understand yet, we look at what the disruption could be to economic systems. We look at what the disruptions could be to governments. If an AI has control over certain aspects of life and it makes decisions we don't understand, and that we aren't sure why it's doing it, it seems okay, but is it really okay? Or if it doesn't share our values. That's really part of the concern. And the technology is growing so quickly that, like most things, our technology is sort of is outpacing our morality. And we're not exactly sure, what do we do if a large portion of our economy is run by AIs that don't need a lot of maintenance, that just need someone to check in on them from time to time? It's never been the case where a machine has replaced a person and that person went on to live a life of leisure. When the assembly line was replaced by robots, They didn't tell all the assembly line workers, go home, we're going to pay you $50,000 a year. All you have to do is sit around now because your job has been eliminated. It's been a, how do I reskill and what do I do now that my job doesn't exist anymore?
I mean, this sort of thing comes up in Star Trek as well, where like I think it's called The Measure of a Man, the episode where they're essentially debating whether Data is a sentient being and has the rights to be a captain. I think there's one in Voyager as well, where the Doctor tries to publish his own work, and they essentially say like, no, you're just a machine. You don't have rights to your own property.
Yeah, and that's another one that's very relevant today, because AIs don't own, you can't own the creation necessarily, or there's a lot of debate about the creation of an AI. Do we all become programmers? Do we all become people that maintain and tweak and modify the system to work the way we want it to work instead of doing the actual work?
Well, can I ask a question about this? So there was this recent PSYOP IOP commentary about this exact topic, where I think it was an old economist, John Maynard Keynes, predicted, by the year 2020 or 2000 or something, that people would only be working, 5 or 10 hours a week, because all the productivity gains that had happened as a consequence of, automation and efforts. And you mentioned a second ago, never in history has, when we gain productivity or there was this new kind of unsetting of technology, that people actually lived the life of leisure that was predicted. Why do you think that is? Like, why haven't we seen this happen in relation? And is it possible this time with AI that we actually do see that revelation?
You need to go back to, the stuff that we all studied when we were, in graduate school, about the basics of why do we work? How we have what you get out of work, as our society has transitioned from being subsistence, where you work to, plow the field and get the food and raise the animals in order to live, to we provide services, we provide other things that are not directly related to survival. I think that our society is not set up to embrace this concept of you don't have to work, or you have to do less work and still provide a large amount of value. To tie it back to Star Trek, the whole big concept of the Federation is they are a post-scarcity economy. They've got the replicator. Anything you want, hey, I want to learn to play the guitar. I don't have to go out and buy a guitar. Replicator, create for me an acoustic guitar. Boom, and an acoustic guitar comes out. I'm going to a fancy party. I need some jewelry. Boom, the jewelry comes out. They have
no money, no need for money.
There's no money. They've never really gone into how things work with the fact that there's no money, but there's no money in the Federation. But we haven't tackled that issue yet of what would it mean to us if we did only have to work, let's say, like you were talking, Cole, 5 hours a week, and we could be all productive as we needed to be society 5 hours a week. I don't think we understand how to do that as a society yet. I think we say, well, I'm only now going to pay you for 5 hours a week, which is not enough to survive on. And then you figure, well, I got to find something else I can do for the rest of the week to earn enough money to survive. Do I think it'll happen with AI? I don't know. I think it's going to depend on, again, does our wisdom catch up to our technology? And I don't know if that's going to happen. Not to be a doom and gloom.
Speaking of that, we have like so many technologies coming down the pipe. I mean, like we can use them in all sorts of applications for IO. I know you're doing great work at the American Board of Internal Medicine. How are you seeing future technologies or even current cutting edge technologies fitting into the IO space?
So the area that I work on is assessment. And I think there's a lot of room now for innovation in assessment. Multiple choice questions have dominated the way we do assessment now for over a century. But there are so many new technologies, from simulations, virtual reality, augmented reality. I think what we're looking at in the future is much more passive assessment. So, for example, instead of having to sit down and actively take an exam, looking at some combination of data that's gathered by an AI from your existing body of work or from your existing practice, whatever it is that you do, and possibly things like wearable technology to be able to follow you on your day. Like some of the new smart goggles that are on, where you could say, okay, as part of your test, put on these glasses and wear them for a week, as you go to the office, as you do your job, and then we'll analyze all the data we get from that, and we'll let you know if we need to know any more about your performance.
As long as they look like Jordy's glasses from TNG, right?
Even he got sick of those after a while. He had to put in they gave him the contact lenses after, when they got to the movies.
No holodeck, no holodeck for selection purposes. I mean, like, what a great way to select people. Just put them in an actual situation.
Yeah, I mean, another one they got right early on was the Kobayashi Maru. If you're having Cole and folks that aren't as into Trek, it was a simulation on a fake starship bridge, and the captain sat in the chair, and real people were the crew members, and they had this, the no-win scenario of you have to rescue a ship in hostile space, and there's no way to win. You can't not rescue them, but if you rescue them, the ship's going to get destroyed. And it's a test they even say it's a test of character. It's a personality test. I think holodecks and simulations are absolutely, for active testing, the way to go. We only use multiple choice questions because we have to. We'd love to do a lot more real, put you in the situation and gather data on how you perform.
Well, can I ask a question about this? Like you mentioned, putting on a wearable and wearing it for a week. Where's the line where, validity for the selection meets invasiveness into your life in terms of getting a job? Like, I don't want to wear something for a week to try to get a job or to get a promotion at work or what have you. Like, where's that line, and what do you guys consider? I mean, I don't know if this is a part of what you're doing in your work, but like, tell us more about that.
And I certainly don't want to create a wrong expectation in folks, because I think that privacy is critically important and is only going to become more important as time goes on and as we have things scraping data from more sources. It depends on what you're trying to do. What's the goal of the testing? If you're evaluating an existing employee, it may be more appropriate to be able to gather objective data through a wearable than to have them sit down in a room and take a multiple choice test. But in this case, they already have the job and you're trying to evaluate their current performance. Relevant. The example you gave, Cole, if I'm applying for a job and they say, well, okay, we want you to put on this smart goggles and this microphone and just walk around through your daily life. Heck no. What do you need to know what I do in my daily life to decide if I'm right for the job? That's more like Scotty was saying. It's more of a, if you want me to perform some of the tasks of the job and you watch me do it, you want me to do a work sample or be in a simulation, that's great. But, like the arguments that happened a decade ago about, well, do you have the right to scrape my Facebook feed? Or do you have the right to ask me for my social media passwords, which thankfully is illegal now? No. How is any of that stuff relevant?
Whoa, people were doing that? Asking for their social media password?
Yeah, there had to be some legal challenges before they would say, it's not enough that we can, your Facebook feed is all private. We have to be a friend in order to see it. So you have to give us your password for Facebook. And luckily that was quickly found to be illegal.
Just like we've seen technology progress through Star Trek. I mean, like, hell, like one of the first episodes of Star Trek, they had this like revolutionary new thing called a printer. All right. And they actually printed out a piece of paper and Spock grabs it, this sort of thing. And we go off into wearables. I don't think we're that far away from even ditching the hardware and just having a camera track your movements and have a pretty damn good idea of what you're doing. Amazon has Go stores which can track you picking up products and this sort of thing. You just like walk out the door. We've seen it on CCTV in London. They can like track individual people, do great facial recognition. We had a really good article, Cole, is the Wayback Machine, of stadiums. They will put vendors in different areas that have more kids and this sort of thing to try and sell more product. We're not far away from ditching the whole hardware aspect and just, hey, you're in the situation, go.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on there is that a lot of assessment is invasive. And by invasive, I mean it takes time. You have to go do something. You have to go to a testing center. You have to sit down and log in and things like that. And I think everyone feels a certain desire to not want to do that. Very few people want to sit down and take a test. There's some advantages to be had in letting people know, hey, you don't have to do this thing you don't like to do. Like your example of checking out with products in a store. You don't have to line up at the cash register and take everything out of your cart and swipe it over a scanner and put your card in and all that. That's inconvenient. You can just go pick the stuff off the shelf, put it in a bag, walk out the door. People would generally say that's nice. That's a nice change. It's a convenience. It makes my life easier. But, I think, Cole, you and Scotty are kind of hitting both sides of the argument there. How much convenience do we want? And how much privacy are we willing to give up to get that convenience? And where's the level? Do I want you scanning everything I take off the shelf? Do I want you to know that I looked at this product and not that one? And then I get an advertisement from this company because they saw me take it but not buy it? Do I want people to know all of that about me?
Yeah, all we need is a little bit of your blood so we can sequence your DNA, and all we need you to do is to put a little microchip in you. No, don't worry. Don't worry about it at all.
I mean, you go back to like some of the old days of like eugenics, like, oh, we just know this person's a bad fit for the role, or Gattaca, right? Like
Yeah.
you're a bad fit for the role, and just be based on who you are. And well, nice knowing you.
I thought about this. You mentioned the stadium example earlier, Scott, of the AI tracking, where people need more hot dogs. And then I thought, like, eventually it's not going to be a person delivering the hot dog. It'll be like a drone or a robot delivering a hot dog to the person in the stand. And eventually then it'll be actually, the game that they're watching, it'll be actually a robot that's playing the game instead of the human being. And then eventually it won't even be the human in the stands watching the game. It'll actually be a robot watching the robots play while a robot delivers the hot dog to the robot. Or, and so it's
like, be like an AI simulation directly to your brain, and your team always wins. Or
exactly.
Actually, according to the Matrix, that'd be a bad outcome because people wouldn't believe it after a while.
Oh, that's when you find out, hey, wait a minute, that's where we already are. This whole thing is just a simulation. We've done this already. And that's when we wake up. That's when you take the pill and you wake up.
I think we've covered all of our sci-fi bases today. You got some Matrix, you got you got Star Trek, you got Gattaca. I think we've done it all. Well, Scott, you ready for some Confusion Matrix? The Confusion Matrix. Real quick, we wanted to say thanks again to One Model, the AI and people analytics pioneer, for sponsoring the episode. And now back to the Confusion Matrix.
Yeah, I did have. I'll have to post it later. I can't figure out how to share my screen. My settings are all updated, but I did. Here, I'll tease it a little bit. I have been going through the Star Trek series one after the other in chronological order, so not when they were released, but when they're supposed to take place, from Star Trek Enterprise all the way through. And I've developed a network analysis of all the different folks on there. I'll have to share it later on. Maybe it'll be in the notes, what have you. But what we'll call this, David, we'll call this Amok time, right? This is a common Star Trek annoyances, and your job is to say, make it so or disregard.
Okay, so make it so if it's something that we need to do, or disregard is don't worry about it.
I don't know. I'm a doctor, not a miracle worker. Whatever you want to take from this, really.
Nice.
It was just a
good way to work that in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good. All right. Damn, Cole already hit the first one. Kirk or Picard. Here, we'll go down the list a little bit. A mirror universes.
Oh,
fan or not a fan?
Make it so. Yeah, I love the whole how reality could have turned out differently. That's great stuff.
It's really weird that it appears in every sort of series, right? Like there's always this. I guess there's some sort of like deep psychological aspects here of like your shadow self.
Well,
right? What would you be like if you made a different decision?
Yeah, and what are all the different aspects of me and my personality? What would I be like if I was raised in a totalitarian regime, or if I had a different parents or different careers? But I got to throw a Star Trek trivia question for you, Scotty. What's the only series that didn't go to the mirror universe?
The only series that didn't. Enterprise definitely did. Strange New Worlds had like a fantasy universe. Obviously, TOS did. I don't remember TNG ever doing it.
That's it.
Is
Next
that right?
Generation never had a mirror universe. We never saw Mirror Picard or Mirror Riker. Nope, they never went there. There have been a lot of novels about it, but they never did an episode or a movie about it.
Oh, man, I've been losing sleep over answering that question. Thank you so much for figuring it out.
What would your shadow self be, Cole? What would your mirror universe?
I don't know. Maybe one where I'm nice to everybody.
You are the mirror universe.
Yeah.
Well, we both have to lose the beards, first of all, because you either have to have a beard or not have a beard. Your mirror self has to be either shaved or not, so Scotty, you'd have the goatee. Yep.
Yeah, mine would be like the Stepford Wives kind of universe, clean shaven, very buttoned up.
On your Louisiana porch and a seersucker, just sipping your tea.
You love that version of.
I do love it. I love it. Okay, next one, transporter anxiety. So beaming around the universe via transporter.
That is something that I would legitimately be concerned about, because the tech, they don't actually move you. They break you apart in one place and shoot the energy through space and put you together somewhere else. How do you know you're the same you? You die when they turn you into a beam of energy? And aren't they just building a new person at the other end that has all your memories? I might be like McCoy. I might be like, no. I'll take a shuttle everywhere you want to go. I am not getting in the transporter.
There's an episode of The Outer Limits, the newer version. I guess it came out in like 2000, something like that, where they deal with this, where they're beaming people off to a distant galaxy, but they have to balance the equation, i.e., once you are beamed off, whatever person remains in that transporter has to be murdered, essentially, and someone like really struggles with it. Cole, would you ever hop in the transporter?
I don't even know. Isn't there like some law of like thermodynamics that you can't create new matter or something like that? And so there has to be a stable state. So you would have to kill your old self, because you couldn't have two of you because of that law of thermodynamics. I'm probably making that up, but it is an interesting question.
I mean, this is how the fake Riker was made. Riker's twin.
Yeah, and that's
his transporter accident.
There you're mixing philosophy and psychology and religion. Cole, basically the transporter accidentally splits Riker in half, brings him back to the ship, but also fails and creates another copy of him back on the planet, and they don't find out until 20 years later. And there's two identical, they were identical at the time, but their experiences went different directions. So what is he? Is he two people? Is he an identical twin? How does that work?
Yeah, this is probably the IOPsych to me, but I just want to know if the transporter is reliable and valid. Like, does it just work every time? Because if it works every time, I'll probably do it. But if it's like, 99% of the time it works, but 1% of the time people just, get split into a million pieces and never return, that's probably when I'm not going to do it.
These are the exact same concerns that Lieutenant Barclay had. He was worried about transporter psychosis, and he wound up like pulling people out of it. I can't remember exactly what happened. Yeah, he was seeing these.
Yeah, he found there were people stuck in the beam somehow. Yeah. Some people got stuck in it, and he was able to rescue them from. But I look at it from the DEI perspective. So if someone says they are, just say you have transporter psychosis, can you discriminate against an employee who says, no, you have to? I will not take the transporter anywhere we go. You have to have a shuttle assigned to me because of that. I mean, can you say, well, we're not giving you a position on the Enterprise because it's a pain in the butt to try and accommodate that? Or is that a reasonable accommodation?
That's a really good point on accessibility of the workforce, right? It's a perfect analogy for Star Trek and like things you would deal with in real life.
Yeah. And then companies would have to start selling getting stuck in the beam insurance to make sure that you've got covered. Because, I'm the kind of guy who gets stuck in the beam. I'm just unlucky like that.
Well, I mean, that's a good segue to the next one. Just like the weird economics of Star Trek. Like, you wouldn't necessarily... What would you do with insurance? And how would you compensate a family that, you beamed them into the middle of the universe, right? Just out into space. What would you do?
If there's no money, I guess, it's immaterial at some point.
Have a replicated guitar. What do you do?
Well, you could you could tie it into all like our current AI fears and say, well, your loved one was beamed into space in a million pieces, but we created a synthetic body, and we put all of their, everything we knew about them into it. And now here's an android that looks exactly like your loved one and has almost all of their memories. God. Like the time that Geordi created the person who was one of the Enterprise designers in the holodeck. and wound up falling in
yeah.
love with her. He had the computer pull everything it knew about her so he could interact and have a conversation with her about how the Enterprise worked. And he wound up falling in love with her. And then one day she shows up, the real one on the ship, and is horrified that he's having a romance with a holographic version of her.
If you guys haven't done it, like I just the other day, I asked ChatGPT, what do you know about me that I don't know about myself? And it gave a really good answer. It gave like like surprisingly wild answer. So like it's already collecting information. It essentially said like you go deep into the details and like you love network analytics and you're highly creative. It's essentially it's a little complimentary, I guess. But it's collecting information on us, and it could replicate at least a facsimile of me at this point.
Well, we talked about this before, and I think this is sort of related to the passive assessment concept earlier. Is at what point can you just ask, ChatGPT if you should, if somebody would be a good fit for the job just because it's passively collected all this, personality data and, maybe even IQ data over time as to like what, just based on the questions you've asked and how you've probed further and the prompts that you've put in and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that not that I necessarily want to live in that world, but it is possible to do.
I did something less threatening than that, but similar when I was between jobs at one point, when I put all the information about myself into a custom GPT, and I would feed in positions that I would find online, and I would ask the GPT to say, what do you think about me for this role? Do you think I should apply for this? Do you think I have the right skill set? What do you think my chances are? And it got better over time as I told it, I'm going to apply for this one. I'm not going to apply for this one. I didn't get this one. I got offered that one. It started figuring out, and I called it my career assistant. Where should I go next? What should I be looking for? What kind of opportunity is right for my career growth? Maybe that's the positive way of looking at it, not the negative one.
Don't worry, American Internal Board of Medicine. David really likes working there. He's not talking about getting jobs at other places.
I do need to point out I'm in all of my 5th week there, so please don't assume I know everything about what I'm talking about yet with regards to them. I'm still learning, and they're wonderful people and a great place to work, but it's I'm still very much learning. So.
On the other hand, like even ChatGPT agrees that you're a good fit for the role. So good on the American Board of Internal Medicine.
Absolutely. Well, you had a question for us, and I can't answer this question, but we've been talking a lot about Star Trek. But you asked, and maybe Scott, you can answer this. What's your favorite way in which Star Trek exemplifies something in IOPsychology? This seems like it would fit in the confusion matrix.
Yeah, we can cover this, absolutely. I mean, there's so many ways. I think one you have Starfleet, which kind of adds a overarching layer of culture. Then you go down to the individual captains. We kind of dug into this a while ago. Their individual leadership styles, the diversity across the different cultures that they encounter is fantastic. We hit on underperforming folks. I think that like the holodeck, that's probably where it's at. Like not only from we talked about it from a simulation or a selection point, but imagine like the training aspect. Like Worf gets in there with his bat lift and like battles other folks just to keep sharp. What if you had just a way to go in a environment where there was no risk of real failure, where you could like really improve? Like I think about like I in the past have struggled presenting to large audiences, right? What if you could go in and just get on stage and do it till you get it right? It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I think the holodeck as a concept, I'm sure there's a lot of difficulty with creating holograms, but VR, I think, is our current implementation of that. And a lot of companies are doing some great simulations in the medical field, whether it's different medical techniques where you can go in and try actually doing them in virtual reality, or for things like you're talking about, Scotty, where I don't remember the name of the company, but they had a training module where you put on the goggles, and not only do you wind up presenting to a large audience, but the goggles would do eye tracking, and it would report back out to you. Are you doing enough, looking around the room? Are you, focusing in on individuals? Are you, or are you just standing there speaking like a robot? and they'd give you feedback on what you do well and what you do badly, and where you need to improve.
I tend to focus on one person. Like they become my buddy in the room, whether no matter how many people are in the room. And like that's my person. I keep coming. I'll scan the room, come back to that person. Scan the room, come back to that person.
Yep.
That person can save your life sometimes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Here, well, one more. Since we kind of hit on it, how about holodeck sex? I mean,
What?
and they hit on this all the time. Especially
okay, like I've been doing my best to play along here. I have no idea what the holodeck is. What is the holodeck, so that I just know what's going on for a second?
So the holodeck is basically it's sort of like virtual reality. It is a giant open room that you walk into that has nothing in it, and you tell the computer what you want to have in it. And it's like VR goggles, except it actually exists in the physical world. They use the replicator and the transporter and force field. So if I say, I want to be in a park so I can lay on the grass and, read a book on a blanket, it will create grass and some water and some trees in this room. And it uses all these different force fields and stuff. So you feel like you're really there. It's basically, they came up with the idea of the holodeck before people invented VR goggles in the real world. We said, we don't really need to actually do this. We can just put the goggles on and give you haptic responses and stuff like that.
Well, if it's like VR goggles and you're talking about, having sex, I feel like that was the whole reason why VR goggles were invented. Is for like lonely guys who, are having trouble.
It gets even more insidious because you're not supposed to, but it happens every so often in Star Trek where like they recreate coworkers. So you could possibly be put in a situation. David mentioned Dr. Brahm that Geordi recreated, and like he essentially figures out like what he thinks is her preferences, and then tries to woo her in real life. Essentially, what happens, but like every so often they'll accuse someone of having sex with their coworkers in the holodeck, which is pretty wild violation.
And again, you want to draw a connection to what we face today is our deep fakes. Is people, know you can't create someone in a holodeck yet, but people are creating deep fakes of politicians, of actors, and they're creating people that if you want to see someone naked, they can do a deep fake of put this person's head on the body and have them move around. It's a similar kind of thing. For our field, what would happen if somebody did a deep fake of their coworker? I created a video of someone saying horrible things about our company, pulling it away from the sex area. Create a video of someone saying horrible things about our company, and I posted it on social media because I want to get this coworker fired. And it doesn't. No one can tell it's a deep fake.
We're reaching a point where we're not going to be able to tell anything that's real from fake. Yeah. It's just going to be really wild.
Well, that's like a real problem. Is like, can you establish identity in the age of AI?
Absolutely.
Is that a real thing? But well, let's move on and do some nerd. I mean, we can continue on kind of the Star Trek track if you want, Scott, because I know we've got that one about the Star Trek fandom. Do you want to start there?
The nerdery.
Oh yeah. This is I was digging through Google Scholar and trying to find something Star Trek related on there, and I found this article. What's the title of it? It is called
Star Trek fandom as a religious phenomenon.
Yeah, very good. So this is an oldie. This is a 30th anniversary. This is from 1994. But this is really interesting. They use an ethnographic approach to essentially see how Star Trek fandom exhibits characteristics related to religious movements. And they find that the origins start when essentially the original series was canceled and people started organizing into groups and conventions and this sort of stuff kind of organically. And there's sacred elements. So fandom involves the sacralization of the fictional universe, and some things are considered canonical to like carry on the religious sort of theme. There's community and identity. They form tightly knit communities, and they take on hierarchies such as captain or admiral in these little clubs. There's mythology, beliefs, stigmas, and persecution for believing in Star Trek or just being a fan of it. And cultural impact. We've seen Star Trek essentially mirrors or at least predicts what's going to happen in the future in real world. It's kind of a cutting edge sort of thing, but kind of just like an interesting take on how Star Trek fans view Star Trek and how it kind of has a similar orientation to as normal religions.
Yeah. I mean, it's always been, I think part of the phenomenon behind it has always been that it is one of the more positive views of our future. It's based around this whole idea of humanity went through a ton of different trials. World War III happens. There was a eugenics war. There was poverty, but we managed to pull ourselves out of it, and we managed to become better people. And we explore the galaxy, and we've grown. We learned we needed, and we learned, and we grew. We didn't destroy ourselves. And I think that's part of what draws people into it, and why they have this almost sometimes religious, feeling about it, is that desire to want to live in that world, or to see us achieve that world, especially when things seem pretty dark, in our real world, is that holding on to hope that, we could turn it around. We could fix these problems and have a really good future.
I think that one of the main benefits of religion, beyond, you see a higher power and all this sort of stuff, is the community that it builds, right? You go and you develop these relationships with other people, whether God is secondary or what, I don't really know. But have you ever seen the movie Trekkies, 1999 Trekkies?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I watch this movie like every couple of years just because it is so good. It's a documentary about Star Trek fandom, and they go to conventions, and they go to these little clubs. And obviously, it's old like this article is too. But it is so great to see people coming together for a common purpose. And like this is like the early days of the internet too, right? So it's really dated. But forming these communities of like-minded people and just really developing friendships, it's really wild.
And some of the first, you talk about the early days of the internet, some of the first, bulletin boards, or the old dial-up bulletin boards where you called in with your modem and one person could be on it at a time, were message boards about Star Trek. Yeah, yes. Generation X here. Yes. And remember the bulletin boards. But yeah, it was, they were dial-up boards where people would talk about Star Trek and leave messages and have discussions. And it just was a way for people to reach out to each other. I think you find that a lot of people that are Trekkies, aside from being portrayed as nerds, it's, we grew up in a time when a lot of the dominant culture was always sports. And it was always sports, and it was always about the teams, and the cool people were all the people that played on the football team. But there were a lot of us that weren't athletic, and we were more into things like science fiction. And now we've reached a point where the people who are the Trekkies or the Star Wars fans or the Doctor Who fans, it's all sort of balanced out in what your interest is.
I mean, the one thing I've figured out is that, at least from the podcast, if somebody's a Star Trek fan, they're going to talk about it on here. It's like a deep part of their identity. I'm like, okay, great, cool. I just have nothing in common.
Cole with eyes open.
Yeah, for sure.
David, I got David with us.
You took me to say, another.
That's a deep cut.
I don't know how that episode relates to IOPsychology, but what a brilliantly written episode.
Maybe like communication difficulties. Let's put it that way.
Yes, breakdowns in communication. Good.
I don't get the reference, but cool. Well, Scott, you came across something really interesting this week. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So where I get all my news these days, TikTok, I saw this video, and this guy was describing Notebook LM. It's a Google product, and it allows you to upload ostensibly as many PDFs as you want to the website, and it will train its own LLM for you. And what it does, it seems to be mainly a study resource, which is really great for any students out there, what have you. It'll create a review guide. It'll create obviously a summary. It creates little quizzes so you can learn the material better. But what it also does is take these articles and creates its own podcast. So a 2-person podcast, and it is good. I dropped in 30. I'm really interested in innovation right now. I dropped in 30 articles on innovation. It explained it so well. It caught things that I had missed in my review. That's a picture of me in 2007. That's a very old photo. But it sounds super real. They make jokes. They banter. They have chemistry. It is wild. It only takes 3 minutes to do. Highly recommend for anyone out there, especially a student. But if you just want to know more about a topic and maybe learn about it in the car or something, is unreal.
with the creation of Notebook LLM, we'd like to announce that this is Cole and Scott's last episode because now the podcast has been automated. So thank you for listening up until this point.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's been a good ride.
The car is a great time. I spend about an hour in the car when I go into the office, and I'll either listen to what I did the other day is I didn't use Notebook LM. I used ChatGPT's their phone app, and I did something very similar. I uploaded a lot of information I was interested in, and I was amazed. I had a 45-minute conversation with it. I just had it turned on, and my phone was sitting off to the side, and like I was talking to a colleague. And I would say, okay, so let's assume that we wanted to try X, Y, and Z. What would be the biggest challenges to doing that? Take a second and go, well, the biggest challenges to doing that. And it was a real conversation. It's absolutely incredible. And I started by saying the car or the train is a great time to do stuff like this. If you have otherwise just, some downtime to see how far these things have come and to ask it questions like, hey, you have all 30 of these articles. What am I missing? What connection am I missing here that I'm not seeing, or what are the authors not seeing here, and get that perspective from the model.
The ChatGPT Copilot is fantastic. I use that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it in terms of like this Notebook L or LM or whatever it was called. It like eventually like the students are all using it to try to summarize the materials and learn at their own pace and their own methods. But the professor's probably using it too to like create their syllabus and create the content for the course. And at a certain point, it's like the course is Notebook LM or whatever it was called. And it seems kind of wild.
It's an interesting question of like a broader question of like, what is the role of studying? What is the role of universities really? I mean, in a world where crystallized intelligence doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I think it's all about critical thinking, being able to rationalize through things, and I mean, you throw in the fact that like you got these deep fakes, and it's difficult to tell truth from fiction. We're reaching a real inflection point where I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, it's like you guys mentioned earlier, like Star Trek is a weird universe because money doesn't exist, and what a world without money. I think we're entering a world where what is the value of knowledge?
Yeah.
Right. Like if you can get the answer like superhuman level to any answer to any question immediately on demand, like, do you even need to know anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be a waste of time.
I think, Scotty, you touched on it. What I think one possible answer to that is if all the knowledge is immediately available and an analysis of that knowledge is available, I think our contribution becomes unique insight. Because if you create a Notebook LM, you create a ChatGPT, whatever system you put all the information into, and you ask it to analyze it, the summary is pretty much going to be the same. It's going to find the same key insights. It's going to find the same information, spit it out. I think the real value then becomes, what do we as human beings, what can we see that nobody else sees? I have a unique insight on all those that the computer didn't come up with. That would seem to have value in a world where all the knowledge is available to everyone at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually the perfect transition to our third article today. So it's by a professor. Her name is Anita Williams Woolley at Carnegie Mellon, and it's called "How Large Language Models Can Reshape Our Collective Intelligence." And the point that you're making, David, is really relevant to this. If LLMs, first of all, kind of subsume all of our collective intelligence, and sometimes this has been called like the wisdom of crowds in the past, or just the wisdom of the collective is better than any unique individual. Well, maybe this is actually where, if human beings have any kind of incremental validity that they're adding to the collective intelligence, it's because of these very specific things that they can bring to the equation. But this article, which regretfully is paywalled, so you can't read too much into it, it talks about, once you subsume all the collective intelligence, can it start to reshape the collective intelligence? And so that now, more knowledge is actually going to be created by the large language models than actually human beings. And what does that do to groups, organizations, and society as a consequence? I don't know. What did you guys think about this in terms of that frame up? And again, I know you probably can't read the article.
I'll go first. Well, one, I don't even Google things anymore. I go straight to the LLM and ask it because I think it provides better answers, and may that be an indictment on Google's failing sort of
Too many
ability.
ads.
Yeah, too many ads. It's harder to find information. But it gets me thinking about, like, to your point, like, what is the role of humans moving forward? And I think that from an evolutionary standpoint, what has progressed humans to the point we're at is random variations. And I'm not sure that aggregating information can do that the way humans can. I mean, there's a reason why we have different personalities. There's a reason why we have different heights and preferences and sexual partners and like all this sort of stuff. And I think that one of the things that is another aspect of evolution is just being able to come up with like different ideas. Maybe that's connecting different dots, or just coming up with wild things that maybe the computer cannot. It's a weird point, I know, but
no, I like it. And if you think about it, if you're looking on like LinkedIn, and let's say you're looking at posts that people put up, I don't know about you, but I feel like I can tell when clip art on LinkedIn was AI created at this point. I mean, it all kind of looks.
And for now,
fair enough for now. But I wonder if we're going to get to that point with content also, where we're going to start reading posts and analyses and, you know, this, as you said, stuff adding to the body of knowledge. We're going to say, yeah, but it's all just kind of the same. It's all kind of shades of gray. It's all looks the same. It sounds the same because it all comes from the same kind of source. Maybe maybe we'll be able to pick out that spark of this was written by a person because it is so different than anything I see out there.
Human feel, which, like, I'll brag on the Directionally Correct podcast. I think we have success because we are different. We talk about things casually, whereas other podcasts are, a little more buttoned up, a little more structured. I mean, they're not going to talk about holodeck sex.
Yeah, they're probably not. And you could our marginal success is we're just really getting a big head about it. Now, the thing I think, here's my conspiracy theory on it, actually. I think the LLMs are actually already way better than is put out there, but through methods to try to use, like, there's called guardrails, I think they actually make them dumber. And I think they make them dumber on purpose to make humans less intimidated by the intelligence they already have and this vanilla-ness that you mentioned, because, I think LLMs that lack those guardrails could probably do some pretty wild stuff. And so I think that the vanilla-ness is a feature, not a bug, in terms of trying to get to mass adoption. But that's my own personal theory.
Well, I've seen data visualizations of ChatGPT 5, which is about to come out, and the way it compares to, I think we're at 4.0 right now or something like that. And it's like looking at a diagram of the Earth compared to the sun. Like the difference in magnitude is unreal. So I have no idea what that's going to look like and what that's going to do. Whether it's going to sound more real, whether it can be more creative, whether it can. I don't know. None of us knows. No. It's wild that we first started talking about this almost 2 years ago to the day. Like, it's only been 2 years.
Yeah, I think it was already early November 2022 when it came out, and we did a podcast on it like a week later.
Well, I think we're accelerating exponentially now towards the idea of AGI, of artificial general intelligence. And I think what's interesting about that is we still don't even know what it really means. What is general intelligence? I say, well, it's an AI that's able to do anything a person can do or think anything a person can think. But I think we're going to find out. Whether we're ready or not to find out, we're going to find out pretty soon, maybe within 1 to 2 years. If ChatGPT 5 is that much bigger and more complex than 4, and 6 becomes exponentially larger than 5, we're going to very soon find out what it means, what AGI means. And hopefully we're ready for it and we know what to do with it when it's here.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely some good food for thought. It's probably a good place to wrap, David. I really appreciate you joining us. I tried to do my best to be a positive contribution to this episode. I don't know if I succeeded or failed, but thank you so much for joining us. But before we give you the final words, Scott, any parting words for David?
I love Cole with arms wide. That's great, man. David, before you head off into Stovacor, how can folks reach out to you if they care to?
I got to start by saying SoCath is eyes uncovered for Cole. People can reach out to me on.
You guys keep using these code words. I don't even know what you're talking about.
I think we got to send you like a curated list of episodes to watch, and then you'll be caught up. You can reach out to me at the American Board of Internal Medicine, dsolot at abim.org. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to talk about whether it's Star Trek related stuff or stuff related to assessment, learning, artificial intelligence, and evolving HR tech. Always happy to meet new people and talk about this stuff.
Live long and prosper.
Fantastic. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, David Solot. Thanks for joining us, David.
Thank you.
Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.